The fighter never really has to deal with legendary resistance, right? That you can't resist his sword. It's either going to do damage or it's not. Where the wizard might have their best stuff get negated, but also you're very rarely you're going to have the fighter one-shot the BBEG because they just cast Dominate, and now the fight is over because you're friends.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave.
Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. All right, so what are we talking about today, Dave?
All right, so there was a meme that Nerder Doug had shared on Facebook, and it was about spell components. It's actually this meme here. It really got me thinking when I was reading the comments, about how powerful wizards are, and how they basically get to bend the fabric of reality. So, like, why would anyone play a martial character?
Right.
And so I wanted to take a look at it and see, like, well, why would we play martial characters? What do the numbers tell us?
Right. I know for me personally, over the course of my gaming career, as you well know, when I was younger, I always wanted to play martial characters. Like, if I added in spellcasting, it was more of a Gish character. And frequently I was inspired by, the infamous, Dritz Du Erden. And, I liked fighting with two weapons, the extra attack. I felt like that was my thing, and I did it way too often. And now...
You and a million other Dritz clones.
And now, like, I feel like I'm drawn more to spellcasters. I feel like that you're able to do more things. And there's, I guess I'm, there's ways to survive as a character, when those low levels having less hit points. But, maybe I'm just, being diverse. I don't know.
So first of all, I will, as far as, fighter versus wizard, martial versus spellcaster, I will say, at least in earlier editions, it was a lot harder to survive as a wizard, because you weren't even a wizard yet. You had to be 10th level to be considered a wizard, as a magic user next to the fighter, right? Like, the fighter was rocking his, 10 plus hit points-ish. That much hasn't changed too much. But the wizard was rocking 4, right? So a D4, right? And you rolled it. So your chances, and you couldn't wear armor, you didn't have many spells. So your chances of surviving to the higher levels was a lot less. Now, when you did survive, you blew past all the other, character classes in the game with what you could do, very much like in 5e. But at least you could tell yourself back then, it's going to be a lot easier to survive to 5th level.
One of the characters that was in a campaign that Dave ran, that he pretty much, it went bad, and over the course of one session, characters began to drop off until, the only one left was the wizard, who was, stuck frozen in amber in, a sepia snake sigil. But we were 7th level, and he had 15 max hit points.
Yeah. So at least back then you had that.
Right.
So we wanted to kind of take a look. We're going to look tier by tier, and we're just going to look at the lowest level for that tier. And we're going to look at the armor class, the hit points, the damage potential, and then we have a category just called miscellaneous for us to talk about just some other mitigating factors. Now, we are going the most generic. This is mostly not including, a lot of specific choices that you could make to tweak characters, or if you play this race or do it that way. We're not going through the laundry list. If you do this, this, and this, then you're as good as a wizard, or as good as a fighter.
So what we're going to look at here, is as Dave says, not non-specifics. There's nothing racial bonuses adding in, but we're going to assume the fighter is going to have a +3 con modifier, and the wizard is going to have a +2 con modifier, and we're not doing any rolling for hit points. We're taking, what the average would be. So, your fighter's going to start off with 13 hit points, and the wizard's going to start off with 8, assuming you're trying to make, the survivable, wizard throughout all this.
And then for armor class, your starting fighter is looking at about 16 to 18 fairly easily, where the wizard is more like the 13 to 16 range, and we're also going with the wizard put their other high stat in Dex. Those are the factors that we're kind of looking at. Now when we go to damage, For the fighter, we're going to look at a longsword. We're going to look at greatsword.
Now, longsword, longbow, regardless of, what direction you want to go, they're going to be the same, kind of damage type. So with a longsword, you're looking at like 4 to 11 points of damage, assuming you hit. And with the greatsword, you're looking at like a 5 to 15 swing. So like a decent amount of damage there.
Now, when we're looking at damage, you can either look at first level spells or cantrips, but the range is from 1 point of damage up to 24 points of damage. I believe Catapult rolls 3d8 single target, so you could possibly potentially hit for up to 24. So at this point, our wizard is still actually has the capacity to do a little bit more damage.
Now, all this is considering, not counting crits, because that would just change the math entirely. But the wizard is limited to how many times that they can do that. The highest damaging aspect of a wizard that they could do all the time would be their cantrip. And at first level, that's going to be Firebolt, doing 1 to 10 damage. So that, kind of falls within that same realm of, what the fighter can do on the middle end for the greatsword, or, on average with the longsword, or it would be on the higher end for the longsword, in comparison. But there's other things to consider. The fighter is going to get a second wind, so therefore they're going to be able to restore hit points where the wizard can't, as well as they're going to get a fighting style which could increase armor class, damage, or to hit, increasing the overall damage threshold.
And then the other mitigating factor for the wizard is while you have cantrips, you can do them as much as you want. You only have 2 spell slots at first level. And if you're using one of them for your armor class, for the armor spell, which granted, it's a good get, 8 hours, you have, +3 to armor class. But the downside to that is you're only going to have one other spell slot. And even at first level, though, a wizard has lots of utility spells that they can draw upon to do a lot of things. But they still lack the spell slots to really tap into that full potential.
All right, so does that cover tier 1?
Yeah, so, in the summary of tier 1 is the wizard is, squishier all the way around, but has the potential to actually do more damage, but they can only do it once. Once the fighter is going to do more sustained damage more often, and, they're far less squishier, having more hit points and a higher armor class.
And I think, that's pretty much, kind of obvious. I think, large amount of games, run at those low levels. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I think players seek survivability of that fighter. So, yeah, why not? And
that being said, too, the difference isn't even huge, right? Like, on the armor class side, yeah, it's a little bit more, and the hit points a little bit more. But I wouldn't say it's a vast chasm.
Right.
All right, so next up, tier 2, which starts at 5th level.
Fighters at 5th level, they begin to really rock, getting some new things. By now, you've probably acquired some wealth, some better armor class. So you're looking at like an 18 to 20 as your range for armor class. And again, taking that average hit points, we're looking at 49.
And then our damage potential for the longsword is 8 to 22, and then 10 to 30 with the greatsword. And this is based off of the fact they now get 2 attacks a round.
Getting that extra attack is really going to seriously bump up that damage. But, that's not the only thing. By 5th level, we've got access to either an ASI or a feat, which means, we can either bump up that damage, or we can take things like Sharpshooter or Great Weapon Master, adding the potential for, while your to hit modifier is going to go down, you're going to possibly add that extra +10 to damage, and that seriously changes the game.
And then you're going to also have Action Surge, so you can go from 2 attacks a round to 4 attacks in a round, but you only get to do this once per short rest.
And if that's not enough, magic weapons and magic armor, especially for like martial characters, this is another thing to consider. Getting access to things that are going to bump up your armor class, your to hit, and your to damage, that's going to seriously begin, pushing those numbers up, because you're going to hit more often and you're going to do more damage when you hit.
Yeah, well, I would say the other thing, too, even better, is things that add extra damage, like a Flame Blade that has an extra 2d6. Mm-hmm. That'll get you, closer to the wizard territory. But speaking of that, let's take a look at the wizard.
All right, so with the wizard, our AC really isn't going up all that much. We're looking at an AC of 16, and we're looking at a whopping 32 hit points, for that average.
But now your cantrips can do 2 to 20 points of damage using the most damaging cantrip, most common, probably Firebolt
Firebolt. But, Firebolt's not our only thing. We're also going to get access to 3rd level spells, which whether you're talking about Fireball or Lightning Bolt, that does 8 dice 6 points of damage. So that's 8 to 48 points that you're going to be able to throw out, and not to just one, but to a massive area. So when you really look at Fireball, we kind of pulled out a battle grid and dropped a template on it, and it looks like, I could get 54 squares, in one zone of a Fireball, if they've all just kind of clustered together, formation style for an army, which means that a single Fireball could potentially be laying out 432 to 2,500 plus damage in a single casting. That is just absurd to really factor and consider.
Yeah, the fighters got nothing for that. None of the martial classes really do. Now, granted, how often are you going to be able to do that? Not often, but it's not uncommon to get 4 or 5 enemies easily. So that spreads out a lot of burst damage all over, which is super useful for the fighter to come in and then clean up multiple targets in a single round, or your other martial classes as well.
Yeah, I feel once you've crossed over in the threshold into tier 2, level 5, getting access to 3rd level spells, and any of the casters really have the ability to just be like, all right, I'm going to control the battlefield as they're kind of designed to do. And the area effect spells, by 3rd level, wizards have 9 spell slots to play with, and there's area effect spells throughout a lot of the levels, if not all of them. Burning hands at level 1, Fireball at lightning and Lightning Bolt at level 3. I'm certain Breath of the Dragon, Dragon's Breath, is another one that you can just kind of keep doing at level 2. And I know there's more that you can just keep shelling out lots of damage over an area, and that's going to just shine on just the amount of sheer ridiculousness that your wizard can do.
Yeah, granted at a 5th level, you're only going to have 2 3rd level spell slots, but then you're going to have 7, 1st through 2nd. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to run out nearly as fast. You still have your cantrips, and you still, as always, have all the utility stuff available to the wizard. But now you have a little more latitude in casting them. You can probably just keep your mage armor on all the time. With that, it's not a big deal now. In both of these instances, we're not really factoring in magic items yet. The wizard would gain a little bit from magic items, but I would say, I believe marshals actually benefit more from magic than do wizards. Like a wizard might get a thing that increases their armor class, but because of the use of armor and shields, you can get more magical bonuses to your armor class than a spellcaster typically can.
And there's really not a whole lot of low-level magic items that are going to boost a wizard's damage threshold.
Yeah. I think there's a couple that might give a bonus to hit with, attack rolls, as well as, maybe increase the DC by 1 or 2.
Right, but there's nothing that's like, oh, well, add this number to this type of spell damage that you roll. They're just not a regular thing.
They don't need it.
Well, clearly.
So next up, we're going to look at tier 3, and that is, the very beginning is 11th level. So we're going to look at the capabilities at 11th level first.
So for our fighter, we're looking at 20 to 22 as our AC, as we've probably gotten more magical gear. So whether you're strapping on magical plate, or whether you're strapping on some other kind of armor and a magical shield, there's plenty of ways to get that 20 and higher for your armor class. For your hit points, you're looking at 103 if you're looking at that average threshold, and that's not too bad for 11th level.
Yeah, and we're being really conservative with the armor class. We're like, all right, at this point, you could have gotten a magic shield +1 and a magic armor +1. So damage potential, we're going to ratchet it up as the fighter. I was super impressed when I was looking at this, because now we're going to get 3 attacks with our extra attack.
So we're looking at 12 to 33 points of damage for our longsword. And we're looking at 15 to 45 points of damage with our greatsword. Again, we're not factoring that number in with the Great Weapon Master or sharpshooter, but those numbers are there, and that's going to be an additional plus 60 damage if you're using that at this level, because it's 10 per hit. And that's if you're counting in the action surge, that you have, that you're still only usable once per rest. But, when you decide to just, go all out, you can really go all out.
Yeah, and again, if you're using Great Weapon Master or Sharpshooter, there's a couple things that can happen there. Like what, and we didn't even incorporate the fact that the fighter might get an extra attack as a bonus action with Great Weapon Fighter. But it still doesn't matter. But you can, because if you're getting 3 attacks and you're action surging, you can do up to a plus 60 points of damage for that round.
Oh yeah,
which is nice. But in a minute you'll see that it's a little underwhelming.
So moving on to the wizard, we're looking at like a 16 to 18 armor class here. Assuming just a little bit of more magical protection. But our hit points have kind of topped out at only 68. So like we've crossed the halfway point of the game at 11th level. And we're not really doing all that great. So we're not going to be able to survive the amount of, magical backlash that we throw out to other people. So we are still very squishy.
Yeah. Now that being said, the wizard does have a couple of things that could go for them that we are not incorporating yet. Like you can get a boost to your armor class from haste. You can use the shield spell, which is going to eat into their other resources. So you can get a little bit tankier, and depending on your subclass, if you happen to be, say, a blade singer, that's going to greatly boost your armor class. So there are some ways to get that up there as well, but there is very little help for your hit points.
Right. But at 11th level we have 16 spell slots, so things like shield and haste become far more readily available to us because we don't have to worry about casting those kinds of things and impacting the amount of damage we're able to pull out with things like, I don't know, disintegrate.
Yeah, with that, let's look at the ridiculous of the damage, right? So we could say that our low end is 50 reliably because, if we were to cast disintegrate, that is the least amount of damage you can do on a hit to a maximum using a spell like Chain Lightning, where you can do up to 320 points of damage. But that's not even where you top out as a caster, as a wizard at 11th level.
So we kind of went through the spells that, a wizard would have access to at 11th level. And when we're looking at, covering area of, shall we say, death, Circle of Death incorporates like the area of like 3 fireballs because it's a 60-foot radius. And my battle grid that we typically play on, that I thought's pretty decent sized, doesn't have the width to cover an entire area that Circle of Death covers. So like I had to like kind of space it out and be like, all right, let's do a quarter and then just multiply it by 4. And oh my God, the ridiculous amount of nonsense that this covers. I figured out that, you could get like 180 targets with this Circle of Death. And it does, pretty much the same fireball damage that, Fireball does, 8 to 48, which doesn't sound like all that much. But if you're hitting 180 targets with that, as long as my math checks out, that is 1,440 to 8,640 points of damage. Holy crap.
Yeah, I mean, you're only looking at 8 to 48 per individual creature, but when you get to a certain point, you can just pack in a lot of creatures. Now, that's optimal. Is there going to be a circumstance where you have that many creatures, bunched up together so you can do it? It's actually an even bigger radius if you put it in the air, but and those numbers go even crazier. But it just goes to show the insanity that is the wizard at 11th level for how much death and destruction you could put out. Now, does that necessarily mean a wizard and a fighter squaring off? Is the fighter, is it that much of a disadvantage? Not really, but because a fighter is much better against a single target, where the wizard is good at taking on the masses.
Yes, and that is always something to consider. So when you're looking at AOE, versus individual targets, there's definitely things that you can do, and the wizard has a number of choice spells that can do an awful lot of damage, even outshining the best things that the fighter is going to do. But you're casting those things, and you're depleting those resources. Once you get down to, sheer damage potential of cantrip versus, regular attacks, I think the fighter still manages to outshine. But
by a lot. They outshine by a lot.
Yeah.
But you do, as the game progresses, the wizard gets more and more resources. That is far less likely to come up. Also, like another mitigating factor is the fighter never really has to deal with legendary resistance, right? That you can't resist his sword. It's either going to do damage or it's not. Where the wizard might have their best stuff get negated, but also you're very rarely you're going to have the fighter one-shot the BBEG because they just cast Dominate, and now the fight is over because you're friends.
Yeah. And we've seen, Dominate or, Hold Person totally change the aspect of, a combat. It's like, oh, well, you know what? They failed their saving throw. They're now stuck. They can't do anything. And the party just, sets their swords to womp and it's over.
Yeah. The final tier 4, and that begins at 17th level.
Now, there's a small caveat to this. The fighter gets a 4th attack, but it's not till 20th level. So, their damage threshold is going to go up, but not for where we're looking at this, because we're starting this and only looking at 17th level. So, the fighter is going to continue to get better, whereas the wizard is just going to get a couple more lower level spell slots as it goes higher. So for our fighter, we're looking at an AC of 22 to 24. It's, really capping out. There's only so much more additions that they can kind of get, when it comes to finding, magical armor.
There is definitely some more points to be eked out, and we're not speccing this fighter for armor class either.
Right, yeah. If you have a +3 full plate, a +3 shield, and, a ring and a cloak of, resistance, or cloak of protection, you're going to be able to get higher than that. But we're looking at the averages, because I would say in most games, you're not getting every single thing specced out unless, you've talked to your DM and you're like, this is my goal, this is what I want.
So now we get into the hit points, 157. That is where the fighter shines.
157 hit points is pretty awesome. It takes several rounds to knock that down enough for things like Power Word Kill to actually affect you. And that's saying a lot.
Our damage potential actually does not change from the last tier, like you said, because it's not until you get to 20th level that you're going to get another attack.
Right.
At this point, you do get that second use of Action Surge, so now you can go Nova for 2 rounds instead of 1 and really up that damage potential.
Yeah, and that's really nice when you see the fighter, begin to unload multiple action surges in a single combat. It's actually really scary and, kind of very reminiscent of those cool action movies.
Yeah, I will say too, and depending on what kind of fighter you're building, your champion is just going to get more opportunities to crit. Your Battle Master can, unload all of their Battle Master dice
all at once,
and do a lot more damage as well. But again, these are very specific instances, so we're not tearing into those. But even after you do, when we compare the damages, while it'll get closer, I don't think we're quite going to see we're not going to quite see the numbers of a wizard in their full glory.
Right. Now the wizard, over the course of this, we're not, we mentioned Action Surge and being able to do it per rest. The wizard gets spell slots and they get an arcane recovery, so they're going to be able to get some things back. But it really doesn't factor it in until you get to those higher levels to get the really sweet, juicy spells, back. Earlier you might have been able to get an extra fireball, but it's, it's not the same as, getting some of the other, really good stuff.
So for our AC, we're still looking at that 16 to 18 range. Granted, you can, again, just like the fighter can bump it up a bit from here, so so can the wizard. The wizard's going to have access to way more spells to help them defensively as well, is worth noting. Still never quite as tanky as the fighter.
Especially since we're only rocking 104 hit points. We're like a stubbed toe away from being able to be taken down by a single Power Word Kill. So I always look at that, and if you're not familiar with that spell, you die if, you're affected by the spell and you have less than 100 hit points. So that's crazy. Just yep, you're out of the fight.
Yeah. So now we get into the damage range for the wizard based off of their most powerful spell they can access at this point. That they're only going to be able to do it once. but it's 160 points of damage to 960 points of damage with Meteor Swarm.
Yeah, that's, it's really incredible, dropping, these areas down and just mowing through the battlefield. It's pretty disgusting.
One caveat, you can't do it to one target, has to be at least 4.
Right.
But it's still a lot of damage, right? You're still talking about spreading out, what is it, a minimum of 40 per target if you roll all ones, and a minimum of, that's more math than I want to do right now, 200 and something.
It's 40 die 6 to like 4 areas that are larger than fireballs.
Yes.
So it's pretty nice, and if you happen to be an evocation wizard, you could just rain death down around your group and just pick out your allies and be like, you're good.
Yeah, you can just troll the fighter, like kill everything around him. Like he doesn't even have enough movement to get to something to kill because you've killed everything.
It's pretty nice. I think I've dropped a Meteor Swarm once in 5th edition games, and it's scary to see.
That's a lot of dice. At this point as a wizard, you have 19 spell slots. Now, in conclusion, right? The fighter tends to be, it is easier to make a tankier fighter than it is a tanky wizard. Like, if you dedicate the resources, you can get pretty tanky with a wizard. The fighter is always going to shine when it comes to hit points. Sure, there are some things you can do to get more hit points as a wizard, but so can you do the same things as a fighter, which is going to be even more, more damage. Now, so the damage for the wizard is much higher, but there's a caveat to that. The fighter can fight all day long. Like there is nothing to stop them from doing their damage every round for, however many rounds are in a 24-hour period. The wizard is going to be limited to their spell slots. Eventually, they will run out of spell slots. And also, like, there's diminishing returns, right? The higher level spell slots start going. Yeah, so the wizard's just going to decrease. They're going to get diminishing returns. They still have a lot of mid-level spell slots that they can use. And when you start dispersing them over large areas, they do a lot of damage. But anytime you're fighting where it's not a lot of multiple targets, or, if you're fighting a single target, the wizard tends to not be able to do as much damage because they can't spread it out. Except for Meteor Swarm, that's still a lot of damage in a concentrated area. Not that that's the best use of it, like that one person.
Right. Now, I will say that the fighter, like, they get the maximum potential at 20th level, whereas, the wizard, it's like, all right, after 17th level, you're not going to really get a whole lot more. Like, you're getting lower level stuff. So, like, you could technically dip into other classes to boost whatever you feel like you need to do. Like, I don't know, take 2 levels of fighter so that you can action surge and cast, a Meteor Swarm and then a Circle of Death, right at the same time. There's ways to kind of, like, play around with things should you so desire. But it's a scenario of, again, with the wizard, it's always going to be diminishing returns, and the fighter is going to have that higher survivability. And if the wizard is dishing out all of this damage against somebody who can take it, it's going to be a problem for them if they turn their attention towards the wizard.
Yeah, and then, on top of that, if you're doing a lot of short rests, you'll get back those abilities that the fighter uses that increases their sustainability and their damage potential, where it doesn't matter how many short rests you take. After the first one, the wizard isn't really getting any better.
You only get 1 arcane recovery, so like you can't get that back. So the wizard is just like, all right, can we go?
Yeah. So in conclusion of all of that, are we saying you should only play wizards and forget the martial classes? No. Like, they're both fun, right? And they're fun for different reasons. You have to enjoy them. But, the truth of the matter is, throughout all the editions of Dungeons & Dragons, except for maybe 4th edition, wizards have been much better, especially as you get higher in levels. 5e is exasperated because at least the martial classes could say in the past, at the low levels, that, well, at least it's easier for me to survive to the higher levels. And, you could just like keep climbing over the bodies of the dead mages in your party that didn't survive until you get one that finally can. And then all of a sudden it gets like mind blowing reality-altering power at their fingertips.
But, regardless of what the numbers show, it also comes down to, like, what do you enjoy playing? I talked about, that in the beginning, I preferred playing martial characters. Now I prefer playing spellcasters. And, like, you used to be a mix, and now, like, you think it's far easier just let me play a martial character because you don't have as many things to consider, and you allow other people to then handle that kind of stuff that you don't want to do.
Yeah, there is something to be said for martial characters that have far less choices than the spellcasters at their disposal at all times, because it allows me to focus on what I can do in the game instead of what my character can do. And, using the things that I have at my disposal to do interesting things instead of, like, always looking for the spell to solve the problem. We didn't get into utility in this because, whatever any other class can do, there's a spell for that probably.
There's a spell for that. Maybe that's another video.
Yeah, there's a spell for that.
So if you happen to like this video, or the others like it, as well as all the awesome content over on Nerdarchy.com, why not come check us out on Patreon and throw us some love there?
Articles like adding more class to your class for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons.
But if you're looking to take your spellcasting in another direction, why not check out Beardomancy? Beardomancy is a new 5th edition wizard arcane tradition for the follically empowered. These wizards have mastered the ancient tradition of Beardomancy. No matter your gender, you can master the school of Beardomancy with enough patience and dedication. Bring your beard to bear against foes and protect your allies with beardomantic energy from the beard dimension. But there are dangerous entities there too, not to be tangled with lightly. A new arcane tradition, Beardomancy, for your wizard, 2 new feats, a new monster, the Hirsute Horror, 11 new Beardomancy spells, including Power Word Beard, 13 new Beardomancy-themed items, and 4 new Beardomantic magic items.
So let us know down in the comments below. Are you Team Fighter or Team Wizard? What is your preference and why?
While you're down there, don't forget to do all those things that make YouTube happy. Like, share, subscribe, click on that notification bell. You know you want to.
Quick reminder, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays we drop new videos here on the channel, so come on back. But you can't wait till then, no worries. We got you covered with this card up here. Who makes the best warrior, strength-based or dex-based fighters?
So until next time, stay nerdy.